So it's been a little bit since I've made a video, and I came across something while I'm working that I thought I'd make a video about just to help people out. So I wanted to show this one sort of obvious feature in that it's hidden up here in this, but it's not used very often, and I used it to solve a problem for work. I'm going to show you the problem here after I kind of explain how it works. So normally when you're doing your rotations or your movements, they're going to be based off of when you hit your T key or set up your transforms over here. They're going to be based off of the object's position itself. So sometimes you may want that. The issue that I was working on is when I wanted to rotate and transform something for an animation, I've got a very specific need in terms of how I want to make a sort of long snake tubular object move around a specific point. And there's probably ways to do it where you can just like do some math on the keys, but this was the best I could come up with in short notice. So one of the what I want to show you is basically taking this and using this little target feature here in terms of what you're rotating around or how you're maneuvering the object that you want to animate in relation to an object that you want to match. I'll get into a little more specific, but the gist is just setting it to like, okay, so in this case I want to do it from 3D cursor. It shifts the rotation point. Now you can rotate around that however you like. Same thing with positioning. So it just makes it a lot easier when you're dealing with a really large object and you want to target it around a space that isn't necessarily its center axis. The other way you can do that, obviously, is if you go up here under options and change the origin of the object itself and move that, but that's kind of permanent, and that will also mess with your previous keys. So what I'm saying here is that you want to animate this thing, keep its origin point stable so that the keys don't shift, and move it relative to some object. So it can be the 3D cursor like I've got here. If I wanted to make another object and rotate it relative to that, whoops, turn off my origins, like relative to this thing, let me turn off, it's easy to get lost here, but relative to this, and I want to rotate it relative to this object at this point, all I have to do is select that object and change this to active element. So if you select this one first, then this one, hit E for rotate, and then active element, the rotation is going to snap to whatever the current position is. Okay, so this seems sort of abstract and not very useful, but I found a very useful way to use it last night, because I'm trying to keyframe this thing, which is this snaky tube that I want it to appear as if you're flying through it on this path. So the tube was made based on this path, and what I've got is this kind of platform flying through, and the gist is that the platform, if you were like right over it, you kind of want this roller coaster ride, right? Doing this. So great. There's probably a lot of ways. There's other ways to do this to create that look. This is like the sledgehammer approach, let's say. But the gist is, in terms of moving this thing, so what I did is I set up the tube. I parented under that tube the curve, got it into position where I wanted it, and then made it so that I wanted it to animate around us like the platform, right? I wanted the tube to move relative to the platform along this curve. So I parented the curve itself is under the shape, the tube, and then that curve has this cube that moves along it. I don't know if you can see that. And the other things, I added like a color so I could see what was front facing on it. So that tube is moving along the path. And what I want to do is, like, I go out and I'll key, so I'll go out to this frame. And then when I want to move the position of the object, I want to make sure that I move it relative to, so if I look at it instead of based on bounding box, this object center is like somewhere over here. Shifting position and rotating to get it to match the position of this little cube that's animating along this spline would be a kind of a nightmare once you get far out from it. But if you change this increment from bounding box to, in this case, I've just got everything relative to the 3D cursor. If we change that to 3D cursor, now I also put this box as a marker, so a lineup object, because basically I want, even though this thing is animating along this path, I want it to appear relative to the transform, this path along the curve. I want it to appear as if it's standing still and the tube is moving around it. And that's the kind of tricky animation that I'm working on. So to do that, I just move this out a couple of keys, and then using my 3D cursor, since I've got this placeholder cube set up relative to it, I can then grab the parent, the thing that I want to animate, this Bezier tube here, and then just move it so that everything lines up relative to the placeholder cube. Now, you know, I've got this cube animating along. You can see where when I rotate, it's not quite off the center here, but it's a lot easier than it would be if I was like trying to target some uniform that's way out here, so or transform, I mean, that's way out there. So if I do this, shift it, and I'm just being, it doesn't have to be perfect because it's a pretty big object, but let's see, nope, it's not in the back, so the rotation of it needs to go just trying to get it square. And you can see as I do it, that's the thing, is like, it's easier this way. You can imagine how hard it would be with the transform being off axis. So once I get it close, I just set the keys, and then I'll go back to a halfway point. You'll see where it shifts just a little bit now, and then you just clean that up. So yes, it's a little bit painful. I'm just trying to animate a loop, but it's a lot easier using this little trick of setting it to some different origin and doing the rotations from that, as opposed to working from the actual object origin. So, you know, the gist is this, like, it'll look like this now when we're doing this transform. So flying through this space. Once I get these keys set, you can see where they kind of shift based on the splines got these node points, how it's subdivided. So the box is going to shift a little bit, but you can tell that it's fairly smooth. It's a little bit on rails, so I can go back later and clean up the keys by easing them or softening them up, changing the curves themselves for the rotation, maybe making it lean into it. But that's the gist of how to do this type of animation. So if somebody knows of a more automatic way to do it, where you bake this keyframe box going around and then somehow transfer those keys in a reverse order to this snaking tube that we want to fly through, that would be good information to post in the comments. Otherwise, hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, just post them in the comments.